Welcome everybody to another installation of Incidentally in the News. This week we have a few different things to touch on, but first and foremost, last week we brought to you a story about the Garmin ransomware attack. And just this morning, Coveware, which is a security research firm, released data that is saying that ransomware attacks payoffs are up 60% in the second quarter from the first quarter to around $178,000. So this just makes our ears perk up and think really seriously about all of our clients that we're working with in incident response and having to do ransomware negotiations. Guys, what are you thinking about this? I know there's another ransomware attack that was just put in the news. CWT, which is a travel firm, was asked for 10 million, gave 4.5 million. Where are your heads at with all of this?
Yeah, I mean, exactly that, right? And it just shows, again, going by what Coveware released and what we're seeing out there as well. It's crazy that we're seeing demands now in the multi-million-dollar amounts, right? Which is absolutely crazy and it's extortionate when you think about it. You know, and even for those guys to negotiate down from 10 million to 4.5, that's still an eye-watering amount. And I think what's really interesting, again, and we kind of touched on it last week, in fact, I think we've spoken about it before, is when we look at how ransomware is developing and it's changing, we're definitely seeing that shift to more extortion. So specifically with this CWT one as well, we saw that the attackers or ransomers, whatever you want to call them, went public. So they put out a Twitter post, you know, and said, "Hey, look, this is what we've got." More specifically as well, so the actual group is the Ragnar group. So it was the Ragnar locker that locked this particular client up. But in addition to that, we've also seen that Ragnar have also linked themselves with Maze ransomware. And Maze ransomware are also known for that same MO, right? So they're doing that same, you know, lock your data, take a copy of it, and they use that as an extra way to extort you for money. So definitely a really interesting space. We're definitely seeing, I think, growth in that area. The statistics back that as well. And again, it goes back down to the importance of not just keeping your data backed up, but just keeping it secure in the first place, right? So, yeah. And I think Larry's we'll touch on that a bit later, maybe in this, but just how maybe ideas around data security, prevention loss. There's so many things that we can do. So, Larry, what do you think about this?
Yeah. No, so it's interesting, and I think, and I don't want us to dive down this rabbit hole again, but it takes us back to this mindset of to pay or not to pay. And so if you think about what's happened over the last 3 to 5 years as it relates to ransomware, there have been more payouts happening, and it's become more normal to pay, right? Even though from an industry standpoint, you know, the FBI and most law enforcement is going to tell you not to pay, but people are making business decisions. Is that a factor that's causing it to go up, right? Theoretically, maybe not. But I mean, if you just think of it from a business standpoint, because hackers are running businesses, right? So if they're looking and they're saying, all right, so the likelihood of my ransomware getting paid out is more likely because businesses are now more likely to pay it because of the business interruption that it's causing. Maybe if I raise it 10% and now 20%, now we're at 60%, right? So from a business standpoint, right, I sort of understand why it's going up. It's just, it throws us back into that rabbit hole discussion of to pay or to not pay.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting, the social media aspect of it. You mentioned that, you know, that they put it out on Twitter. I think, you know, again, coming in here from the comms perspective, you know, businesses aren't just dealing with quiet little breaches that they need to kind of pay off or deal with and remediate. People are being clever and going out onto social media. I mean, CWT is a large travel firm, but in the scheme of things isn't a massive customer-based firm. But even firms that aren't consumer-based, you know, B2C businesses are concerned about the public persona that they now have to deal with, the comms team and the PR crisis team that needs to come in to handle it. So it's not just a matter of cleaning up the mess quickly and getting the data secure again. It's also a matter of making sure your reputation doesn't go down the toilet in the midst of trying to restore your system and get everything back online. And that's the danger that I think I really see, is that it's compounding the risk.
Well, and that's where I think these attackers are getting smart. They recognize the public impact, right, of putting those things out there publicly has just as great an impact as anything else. And so people, that brand, public awareness and brand damage, that has a price.
It ruins the
That,
trust.
I mean, they're definitely doing that, right? They're leveraging that. They're leveraging that, and you know, we've actually dealt with a case last week, not quite as big as this one, but it was the same concept. So not only was there the ransomware element of it, but they actually stole the data and they went public with just a snippet, enough that it caused concerns for their clients.
Right.
And now the clients are going to be asking, well, what are you doing about it, right? And then we've got the whole notification side of things. So depending on, you know, what state the data is, or, you know, what country, there's a whole load of obligations that these guys will have. So they need to conduct an effective investigation and notify possibly affected individuals. You know, absolutely, you need to seek legal advice in the state that you're in, but every country, every state has some sort of obligations. So how quickly do they need to respond to that? And I think we saw another one as well, didn't we, recently, Larry? In fact, there's another one we were going to touch on today. Was
Beaumont.
The Beaumont
Beaumont
one?
Health
Yeah.
System. Yeah, Larry,
Yeah.
maybe if you could
Beaumont
take
Health
us through
Systems.
that one. Great point, Kadir, because this is a system that was, you know, breached in 2019, but has also been breached in 2020. And Larry, I think some of the things that we were talking about is just even the length of time it's taking for them to come forward with what the breach actually looked like, how long the remediation is taking, and so forth. So if you could take some of our listeners through that.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Having been breached in May/June of 2019, you would assume that coming out of that you are going to posture appropriately and be prepared in the event the breach happens again, that you're going to be able to respond quickly, remediate quickly, and recover quickly, right? But in this instance, based on the information that's been released, they found out about it in January. They started an investigation that didn't end until June. And to me, it's curious how a business email compromise of 6 users takes 5 months to investigate. It was just very curious for me as to how that happened. And so did they not do enough based on the breach that happened in 2019 to prepare moving forward? I mean, this was much smaller, right? The last one was 112 to 114,000 users. This is only 6,000. But taking 5 months to go through any type of investigation before you figure out what the true impact is based on that business email compromise is just a little too lengthy from my perspective. I don't know all the details yet. I'm hoping that those will come out, or I'll be able to get those through my network. But it just seems at face value that if you've been through a breach once, that your ability to respond to the next breach, because we know it's going to happen again at some point, that you've now got some sort of cadence and plan and everything in place, and a partner on the outside, right? A breach coach, all those different types of things to help you sort of get through this quicker.
Well, and this is just conjecture, so I don't know if this is what actually happened, but I know in speaking to our IT restoration team, some of the other concerns are if you don't contain that environment quickly while you're in there trying to remediate, you could get hit again, which makes you even more susceptible. So the idea that it would have taken this long, potentially, again, we might have just been seeing what they were willing to release publicly from a PR perspective or communications perspective. So perhaps this was wrapped up sooner, and they had the luxury of not having to make it more public because of maybe the attackers didn't make it public for them. But yeah, can you guys talk a little bit about that of needing to like contain your system quickly? Like you do need that team to be jumping in quickly, because otherwise you remain open.
You absolutely do, right? Because you know, again, we see it in lots of different incidents, and we've had experience with it where you know, a couple of different approaches. But let's say, for example, we take the restoration approach. So someone's had their systems breached somehow, some way. Nobody knows how, because it's only just happened. They're like, okay, well, let's just restore for some backups. That's all well and good. But just by restoring the backup from a week ago doesn't mean that you've closed that vulnerability, because that vulnerability was still there a week ago.
Right.
So they're like, yeah, we're good. We've restored. Everything's great, for it to just happen again. So you're actually back to square one. So it goes back down to trying to really identify what that root cause was in the first place, understanding how it happened.
Right.
And this is why it's always good to also kind of consult out of your four walls. So when you're living through an incident, all you know is what's happened to you. You don't know how it's happened, but you know what's happened.
Right.
By seeking professional help, or even speaking to the wider network and wider community, what you'll find is someone out there has probably experienced exactly the same thing, and they've identified how it happened by going through a process. So it could be some quick wins. Oh, this is how it happened to us. Have you checked that? you check that and you realize actually that was a vulnerability that was exposed. Oh, what do you know? That's probably how they got in, and you can lock it down. So I think it just goes back down to not being afraid to talk about these things as well. When I worked in retail a few years back now, it was, again, we were very closed in terms of what we did. But, everything we were experiencing, our competitor was experiencing. And if we'd just spoken to each other, we both would have been in a much better place.
Right.
But I'd also saw in the news, and it's interesting that the fight against these things is growing as well. So there's some pretty good companies out there, BlackBerry being one of them, and they've just released their malware analysis and kind of reverse engineering tools, and they've made them public, right? So it also shows that there are organizations out there and institutions that are starting to come together to try and really raise the fight against these kind of criminal activities. So that's really good. And I'm going to love to hear from the team, our incident response team and our malware guys. They can't wait to get their hands on this and start pulling this apart and reverse engineering some of the malware that we've got. So it's going to be great to hear from them firsthand how this is working. And Erin, you mentioned as well, I think there's also some other stuff that like Goldman Sachs and
I was gonna say, to your point about being able to talk within your industry, news is out that Morgan Stanley is spearheading a committee or a working group, if you will, of banks, so their competitors, as well as multiple cloud security companies and cloud companies, computing companies, as well as some technology partners, to discuss how they can, as an industry, standardize and automate some of that encrypting and compliance that they need to keep up with in finance and banking. But that, to your point, like a lot of times you would never normally see a bunch of competitors getting into a room to say, we got to solve this problem together, but it's enormous enough that they don't want to be vulnerable. And if they don't band together, the wild west of cloud computing is not going to bode well for anybody. So they're coming together. So I think that ties in nicely with your point of getting outside your bubble.
Well, this thing that they're doing, they're building a consortium, right? And so these types of consortiums are the future. Everybody recognizes that competitively, right? Yes, we have our different businesses that we're trying to drive, but they also recognize the risk associated with cyber threats. If they don't share, if they don't come together in a room and talk about how to do this better collectively, it poses risks to each of them, right? And so they're better and they're stronger together and collaboratively. We've been having this conversation now for the last 10 years. We've got all of these ISACs that have formed, and now these ISALs that have formed, right? That are these information sharing organizations that are geared and purposely developed to help organizations in similar industries share threats, threat analysis, all the different things that they're saying, because we realize that collectively we are better. But it's funny because the one thing that nobody was addressing is architectures and the cloud. Nobody was really dealing with, right? We have Cloud Security Alliance has been doing an amazing job creating standards, but nobody's been doing anything as it relates to the adoption of those standards and how to ensure that they're being adopted in the enterprises as companies are moving, ahead just so fast to the cloud and doing, innovation is the new word, right? So everybody's trying to innovate. Everybody's going through their cloud adoption strategy and figuring out how they're going to go there, whether they're asking to go there or whether they're being thrown there, right? We had a recent client that we were having a conversation with, and their IT and security team basically said, yeah, the business decided they were going to the cloud and didn't have a conversation with us. And so I think it's something that is just happening, and it's going to take these types of consortiums across different industries, right? Banking's doing it, retail's probably going to have to do it, right? All of these different, healthcare needs to have something similar, where this industry partnership with both the corporations that are utilizing and the entities that are providing the capabilities are coming together to try and figure out what are the standards we need to adopt, how do we build these architectures, and how do we enable that so that we can do this quicker, faster, and better to not have to deal with the threats that are impacting our businesses.
Absolutely. Well, as usual, this is always meant to be just a quick roundup of the news, and we managed to put quite a few stories into that short time. So covered off on the CWT breach, on ransomware increases, on BlackBerry's new technology, Morgan Stanley's working group. I mean, guys, that's pretty impressive. I'm happy with this. Hopefully we don't have to before the end of the week, but we continue to watch the Garmin situation, the Twitter situation. As everyone might have heard, Twitter now, they've arrested a 17-year-old who was responsible for that. I mean, the threat actors are all shapes, sizes, ages, countries, everything. So be aware and know that we at CyberClan are always here to help. Thanks so much, Kadir and Larry, for being with me this week. We will be back with you guys later this week or early next week with more stories of Incidentally in the news.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks.